When God is about to bless a soul, it rarely comes wrapped in comfort or ease. In fact, the first signs of divine providence often appear as trials, contradictions, or hidden sufferings. For the soul that earnestly seeks union with God, blessings are never merely material or superficial. They are designed to lead the soul towards sanctity. In today's world, we often mistake blessing for emotional satisfaction or temporary success, but in the true order of grace, a blessing is anything that draws the soul closer to its ultimate end, the possession of God himself. Before the divine pours out great gifts, he prepares the soul through a process of purification. This involves detachment, stripping away, and deep humility, because pride and attachment make the vessel unfit to receive his favor. Though this process can be painful, it is always medicinal, a divine surgery that removes what corrupts the soul so that healing and receptivity can follow. Thus, when God is about to bless you, the presence of discomfort, confusion, or spiritual dryness is often a sign of his hidden work in shaping you for something far greater. The saints have always known this. Profound graces are preceded by profound trials. So if you encounter detachment from worldly securities or the vanishing of comfort, do not despair. You may be closer to God's blessing than your eyes can perceive. When God begins to bless a soul, he rarely starts by giving. His first action is often to take away. This is the paradox of divine generosity. Before he adorns, he strips. Before he consoles, he empties. Before he fills, he purifies. A soul still bound by self-love or attachment cannot yet receive the fullness of grace. Therefore, God begins not by adding delight, but by removing disorder, clearing the interior obstacles that would prevent his gifts from taking root. Every blessing is ordered toward humanity's ultimate end, the beatific vision. Thus, divine favor does not merely bring temporary comfort or success. It brings an increase in sanctifying grace, virtue, and conformity to God's will. Yet the human heart, clouded by the remnants of sin, clings to lower desires, to what is disordered or self-centered. If God poured his gifts into a soul still full of pride, vanity, or selfishness, the blessings themselves could become a source of ruin. Instead, he purifies through interior trials, suffering, contradiction, or detachment, shaping the soul to receive grace properly. This purification is not punishment, even though it may feel painful. It is healing, like a physician who burns or cuts to restore health. John of the Cross calls this the dark night, a stage in which God withdraws the sweetness of prayer and spiritual pleasures, teaching the soul to love him purely for who he is, not for the consolations he provides. Until this detachment occurs, love remains mixed with self-interest, seeking God for comfort rather than himself. The first sign that a soul is about to receive blessing, therefore, is often the removal of consolation and the onset of hidden trials. Purification can take many forms. Sometimes it is physical suffering, illness, fatigue, or loss of strength, humbling the body and detaching it from worldly ease. Other times, it manifests as emotional or relational trials, misunderstandings, rejection, or solitude that force the soul to find stability only in God. At times, it is intellectual darkness, confusion, or a sense of God's absence, prompting the soul to stop relying on its own understanding and to rest in faith. In every case, the principle is the same. God purifies through deprivation, not out of cruelty, but because attachments must die before blessings can live. The depth of purification corresponds to the magnitude of grace that follows. Greater blessings require deeper trials, just as gold must endure intense fire to become pure. Many souls pray for extraordinary graces, but falter when purification begins. They desire sanctity without detachment, glory without suffering. Yet this is impossible. Even Christ himself entered glory only through the cross. Purification, then, is not optional. It is the very mechanism by which divine order is restored in the soul. During this stage, two major pitfalls arise. The first is discouragement, the temptation to interpret suffering as God's displeasure. In truth, purification is a mark of predilection, a sign that God seeks to elevate, not destroy. The second is resistance, clinging to the very attachments God is removing. Resisting purification prolongs suffering because God will not pour new wine into old wineskins. The soul must yield entirely. When the soul submits with humility and diligence, purification begins to bear fruit. Passions grow ordered, prayer becomes more recollected, and faith deepens. The soul stops seeking God in consolation and begins to seek him in his will. That is when God begins to adorn the heart with blessings, not necessarily in circumstances, but in interior strength, peace, and light. What once seemed unbearable becomes sweet, for the soul recognizes it as the hand of divine love at work. The vanishing of familiar comforts, unanswered prayers, and the feeling of emptiness are not signs of abandonment, but preparation for blessings beyond imagination. To the world, it appears as loss. To faith, it is divine craftsmanship. The vessel must be cleansed before it can be filled with new wine. After the initial stage of purification, one of the clearest signs that God is preparing to pour out his blessing is the sudden intensification of spiritual warfare. The closer a soul draws to higher virtue and intimacy with God, the more fiercely the enemy resists. This is not a coincidence, but a principle rooted in reality. Grace and evil cannot coexist peacefully. The devil does not expend effort on souls that are complacent or stagnant. He focuses his attacks on those whom God intends to use powerfully. As grace begins to transform the soul, deepen prayer, and increase interior freedom, the enemy perceives his influence waning and intensifies temptation, confusion, and external trials in a desperate effort to derail God's work before it bears fruit. The closer the soul approaches divine intimacy, the more bitter and subtle the attacks become, often bringing sins or weaknesses thought long conquered back into focus, stirring old fears, clouding reason, and undermining confidence. The person may feel as though progress has vanished, yet this very turmoil is often evidence that the enemy is reacting to grace encroaching upon his realm. At times, these assaults appear more subtle. Prayer may feel dry or fruitless. The soul senses abandonment, and the devil whispers that all effort is wasted. Such despair is one of his strongest weapons, designed to make the soul abandon prayer precisely when it is bearing hidden fruit. Saints like St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross warn that the imagination and memory become the devil's primary battlegrounds. He fills the mind with distractions, anxieties, and false images of failure, hoping the soul mistakes these for signs of God's displeasure. The proper response is not to look inward at feelings, but upward to the constancy of divine truth. God has not abandoned the soul. He allows the enemy to act so that the soul may grow in discernment and virtue. In such periods, the weapons of spiritual warfare become indispensable. Frequent confession, steadfast prayer, devotion to the Blessed Virgin, and sacramentals like the Rosary and holy water. Humility and obedience are particularly potent because the devil despises them. They mirror the virtues that led to his downfall. Engaging the enemy emotionally only feeds his influence. Remaining steadfast in quiet, obedient faith terrifies him more than any resistance born of human effort. Theologically, this warfare is not cruelty but training. Just as a soldier is tested in battle before commanding an army, so the soul must be proven in conflict before receiving higher grace. Through struggle, virtue is fortified. Through resistance, humility is perfected. Every attack, if endured faithfully, becomes an instrument of sanctification. What the enemy intends for harm, God transforms into strength. This is why saints often rejoice quietly amid intensified temptations, recognizing that the devil only rages when he senses he is about to lose his hold. Consequently, when spiritual opposition grows intense, internally and externally, it must not be interpreted as failure. It is proof that a blessing is near. The greatest victory the enemy can achieve is not temptation itself, but convincing the soul to surrender. As long as the soul resists even in weakness, grace is active and growing. When strength fails, prayer feels empty, and consolation disappears, the soul stands most firmly in faith, and God is closest. Intensified spiritual warfare is not a curse, but a clear sign of impending grace. It reveals the enemy's fear and confirms that divine favor is on the horizon. If besieged by temptations, anxieties, or opposition, the soul should take courage. The battle itself is evidence of advancement toward blessing. The devil fights hardest where the stakes are greatest, for he knows the soul is about to be claimed by God. Alongside the trials of warfare, another profound sign of impending blessing is divine silence. The soul accustomed to feeling God's presence in prayer suddenly finds heaven muted. Consolations vanish. Prayer feels mechanical and fruitless. The intellect perceives no light. The heart feels no warmth. To the untrained eye, this seems abandonment, but to the spiritually discerning, it is a mark of intimacy. God withdraws himself, not in anger, but in wisdom, teaching the soul to love him for who he is, not for what he provides. Sensible consolations, peace, sweetness, the sense of closeness give way to pure faith. When the soul depends on emotion, it has not reached mature love. Divine silence becomes the crucible in which faith is tested, where the soul learns to love God simply because he is beyond feelings or comfort. This hiddenness is essential for the maturation of love, stripping away illusions of control and fostering dependence on God alone. During this season of divine silence, the soul experiences what feels like abandonment, yet it is precisely here that God is most active. The consolations once present in prayer, sweetness, warmth, and clarity disappear, leaving only the empty framework of faith. The natural response is often fear or despair, as the soul believes it has lost God, failed in prayer, or that its efforts are wasted. The devil seizes upon this darkness, whispering lies of futility and rejection. Yet saints teach that these are precisely the moments of most profound divine activity. The absence of consolation is not a void, but a hidden presence, a refining fire that detaches the will from reliance on emotion and trains the soul in pure love. Prayer becomes an act of fidelity rather than feeling devotion maintained not for reward but out of obedience and adoration. In this stage, love is purified, stripped of self-interest, and faith is exercised without sensory support. One act of faith made in darkness holds greater spiritual value than 1,000 acts made in light, for it costs infinitely more and reveals the soul's commitment to God alone. The silence of God, though challenging, is never arbitrary. It is purposeful, ordered toward the transformation and elevation of the soul. By withdrawing the familiar consolations of the spiritual life, God cultivates endurance, humility, and hope, guiding the soul to spiritual maturity. Beginners in prayer are nurtured with sweetness, much like a child fed with milk. Yet when the child must grow, the milk is withdrawn, not as punishment, but to promote development. Similarly, when God conceals his presence, he invites the soul to feed on the solid food of faith and abandonment. The soul learns to act, love, and pray, not according to sensation, but according to the truth of God's will. Though the darkness is often unsettling, it is a divine classroom where the soul is trained to hear and obey in the hidden depths beyond sensory perception. The absence of comfort cultivates independence from creatures, anchoring the soul firmly in the Creator. Detachment is another crucial sign of preparation for blessing. God may remove possessions, relationships, status, or spiritual consolations that once seemed essential to peace. To the natural eye, these losses appear as harm or misfortune, but in the supernatural economy, they are instruments of purification. God cannot pour new wine into old wineskins. The soul must first be emptied of attachments that hinder surrender. Human hearts instinctively cling to what is tangible, visible, or comforting, seeking stability in created goods rather than in God. Before elevating a soul, God must free it from these attachments. Loss in God's plan is not destruction, it is pruning. Christ himself said, "Every branch that bears fruit, my Father prunes, that it may bear more fruit." This divine pruning removes not only sin, but lawful attachments that obstruct complete surrender. Finances, opportunities, and plans may vanish, relationships may end or be strained. These removals are not arbitrary. God weans the soul from reliance on the temporal so that its confidence rests solely in him. Only when nothing remains to cling to but God can the soul fully know his providence and stability. Relational detachment is equally purposeful. Friends may drift away, trust may be broken, and solitude may become the soul's companion. As long as peace depends upon human approval, affection, or presence, love remains imperfectly ordered. God detaches the soul to purify love, teaching it to love as he loves freely, without expectation or fear of abandonment, rooted in the eternal rather than the temporal. Interior detachment can be even more painful. Spiritual consolations, prayerful sweetness, and the sense of God's presence may be withdrawn. What once guided or sustained the soul may vanish, leaving emptiness that seems unbearable. Yet it is precisely in this interior void that God is most active, shaping the soul like a sculptor chiseling away excess stone to reveal the form within. What appears as deprivation is actually creative, a process of sanctity in progress. The soul that accepts this with humility and patience discovers that what is given up, temporal comfort, attachment, even spiritual sweetness, is exchanged for something infinitely greater, the capacity to receive God himself. True detachment is not indifference, it is the proper ordering of love. It does not mean abandoning care for people or things, but loving them rightly, holding them in hand, not in heart. When God removes what is held too tightly, he does so out of tenderness, not cruelty, making room for greater gifts. Losses, fading relationships, and the dissolution of security may be signs of his intimate approach. The stripping is not abandonment, it is preparation. When the soul can surrender fully with open hands and a peaceful heart, saying, "Thy will be done," it has entered the core of divine blessing. Only the detached soul is free, and only the free soul can be filled with God. After purification, silence, and detachment, the soul that has persevered begins to experience something entirely new: clarity, quiet strength, and stability of faith. This emerging clarity is not superficial relief or fleeting emotional consolation. It is a supernatural stability, the first tangible fruit of divine blessing. When God pours his favor into a purified soul, the initial sign is interior illumination, a spiritual lucidity that allows the person to perceive divine truth with certainty and simplicity. This understanding is not merely intellectual. It penetrates the will and affections, reshaping the heart from within. The soul begins to see, not through reasoning alone, but by interior conviction, that all events are governed by divine providence. What once seemed chaotic now reveals a hidden order. Events that caused bitterness disclose mercy. Circumstances that brought confusion or fear now reflect God's guiding hand. This is what the saints call the light of the gift of understanding, a supernatural insight infused by the Holy Spirit, enabling the soul to perceive the presence and purpose of God in all things. The truths themselves have not changed, but the soul's vision has been transformed. With this interior illumination comes stability of faith. The soul no longer relies on emotions for conviction, nor seeks constant reassurance. It becomes a living instrument of divine truth, anchored in certainty rather than sensation. Prayer, once a strenuous effort of the will, transforms into a quiet, confident gaze upon God. The will, strengthened by grace, no longer wavers between fear and trust. It rests in what God has revealed, even when reason cannot fully comprehend it. Faith becomes participatory, a supernatural alignment with God's strength, capable of enduring trials without being shaken. This clarity, though it may appear suddenly, is the result of long preparation through purification, warfare, and detachment. After months or even years of interior struggle, the soul awakens one day with unexplainable peace. The storm of trials has passed, and a quiet light emerges, not as an emotional high, but as firm certitude, the peace Christ promised when he said, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives." This peace reflects a reordering of the interior faculties. The intellect now submits to faith, the will aligns with charity, and the heart remains undisturbed by circumstances that once caused agitation. This is the fruit of blessing, a steady interior rooted in divine truth. Theologically, this transformation occurs because purification has removed self-love, pride, fear, and attachment, leaving the soul transparent to grace. Like windows clouded by grime suddenly wiped clean, the soul can now receive the light of God freely. Life is no longer interpreted through the lens of self-interest, but through the perspective of divine wisdom. Even suffering is understood in relation to God's eternal plan. This interior illumination naturally produces humility. The more clearly the soul perceives God's hand, the more it recognizes its own nothingness. True clarity never breeds pride, it fosters awe. The soul ceases to claim understanding through its own reasoning and instead participates in divine wisdom. It becomes simple, docile, and silent. The intellect no longer debates with God, it adores. The will no longer resists, it consents. This state marks spiritual maturity when faith remains steady, unshaken by circumstance, and divine blessing begins to overflow. The fruits of this blessing are not always visible in external prosperity, but manifest in the soul's character and actions: charity, joy, patience, peace, and fortitude. Even if the soul is unaware of these changes, others often notice its presence, words, and prayers radiating stability and guidance. The purified soul, once confused or restless, now becomes a channel of divine light, a source of calm and instruction for those around it. Its clarity and stability are not hoarded. They extend outward, drawing others toward the same truth and divine order. Yet this stage is not an end, but a beginning. With interior peace and maturity, the soul can now cooperate more fully with God, bear heavier crosses without fear, and serve with detachment. The blessing is both internal and mission-oriented. It strengthens faith so that action aligns with divine will and grants clarity so that discernment guides service. The true blessing lies not in comfort, but in readiness to participate in God's work, acting rightly because of strengthened insight and unwavering trust. When the soul reaches this stage of clarity and peace, it no longer searches for signs or confirmations. It has become a living witness to God's providence, transformed in its perception, judgment, and love. Prayer is no longer driven by emotion or expectation, but by faith and adoration. The soul acts from conviction rather than sensation, resting in divine order even when circumstances remain challenging. This is the culmination of the journey through purification, detachment, and silence, a soul prepared to receive blessing not with pride or presumption, but with humility, receptivity, and freedom. The trials, losses, and struggles that once seemed unbearable now appear as the instruments of God's design, necessary steps that prepared the heart to receive a blessing beyond imagination. This divine blessing is not measured by external success or material favor, but by interior transformation. The soul experiences the steady fruits of grace, patience in suffering, constancy in prayer, charity in action, fortitude in trials, and an unwavering trust in God's providence. What once caused restlessness now leaves the soul undisturbed. Faith is no longer fragile. It is fortified by suffering and strengthened through perseverance. The intellect aligns with divine truth. The will harmonizes with God's purposes, and the heart is free from self-interest. The soul has passed from seeking God for consolation to loving him for himself alone. It sees clearly, acts rightly, and endures steadfastly. This is the essence of divine blessing, a soul fully formed in grace, prepared to act in accordance with God's will and capable of radiating that light outward to others. At this point, God's favor flows continuously into the soul, not as a fleeting gift, but as a steady transformation. The blessing is both internal and active. It equips the soul to bear new responsibilities, to engage in service with detachment, and to endure future trials without fear. The soul has moved from emotion to understanding, from reliance on comfort to reliance on God, and from spiritual restlessness to peace grounded in eternal truth. Prayer is now a quiet gaze upon God, filled with adoration, trust, and obedience. The interior faculties, mind, heart, and will are aligned in harmony with divine purpose. This is the fruit of patience, endurance, and humility. A soul fully prepared to receive God himself as its ultimate possession. Thus, whenever one experiences the sequence of purification, detachment, interior silence, and spiritual warfare, these are not signs of abandonment, but of preparation for blessing. The soul that perseveres in these trials is being meticulously shaped by God's hand. Every loss, every pain, and every struggle has a purpose: to reorder the soul, detach it from lesser things, and prepare it to receive a blessing that is eternal rather than temporary. By enduring with faith and patience, the soul emerges transformed, capable of perceiving divine order, acting rightly, loving purely, and standing steadfastly in the light of God's truth. In the fullness of this transformation, the blessing becomes visible not only in the soul's interior life, but also in its effect on the world around it as a channel of peace, guidance, and grace. Ultimately, divine blessing is not about what is given, but about what the soul becomes. It is the result of purification, trial, silence, detachment, and illumination. The soul learns to see as God sees, to trust without reservation, and to act in accordance with his will without fear or hesitation. The blessing is the full formation of the heart in love, the intellect in understanding, and the will in obedience. It is the manifestation of grace that enables the soul to live fully in God, radiating his light, stability, and peace to all who encounter it. When the soul reaches this stage, it no longer asks for confirmation or signs, for it has become a living testament to divine favor, a vessel fully prepared to receive God himself. In this way, blessing is not a gift of comfort, but the gift of transformation, the possession of God, and the ability to participate fully in his eternal plan.